Hello, everybody. It is April 16, 2020, and we're here for the Family Law Mediations via Zoom webinar. And we have a wonderful panel of experienced mediators with us today from each end of the state. Well, not north, I apologize, but it's really hard to have more than 3 people on panel. We have Kristen Robinson, who's in Oakland County and mediates through the Tri-County area. Melissa Leckie's in the middle of the state here in the Lansing area. And Sean Cook is in Muskegon County, and I'm guessing she probably does most of the west side of the state for mediations. And we have a bunch of things to talk about today, but for those who haven't attended one of these webinars before, I wanted to let you know about a couple features. There's a chat button at the bottom of your screen. So if you have comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will try to follow them because my panelists are going to be talking too much. It's going to be hard for them to take a look at the chat button. And if we may not be able to answer everything that gets put in the chat, but at least that gives me the opportunity to see what the questions are. And some of you did email me in advance, so I even know some of the questions that people have already. There's also if I call on somebody, or if you want to talk, if I call on you, I'll tell you to unmute yourself, so you should be able to know how to unmute yourself. And you can also there's a raise your hand function. If you hit on the participant button, you can raise your hand, and that way I know you have a question, but putting it in the chat is fine too. And the exciting thing about today's webinar, which is really different than all the other webinars we've done in the past month since we've had a shutdown, is we're going to be talking about some of the features of Zoom that will help attorneys with mediation, in addition to the features we just talked about. But basically, just to give you a quick overview, and I'm Lisa Speaker, for those of you who didn't know. First, we're going to talk about why use mediation now, and I know some people have concerns about it as well. Then we're going to talk about domestic violence screening, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is logistics of actually doing a remote mediation. We're going to do a quick little module showing you how to use the breakout rooms. It's not going to take very much time, but I do want to make sure that we have a chance to show everybody some of the features that we've learned about, and some of them we're just learning about every day. I just learned about a new feature yesterday that my panelists don't even know about yet, that I think could help with mediation. So there's a lot of new things coming out. You have to kind of keep up with it, and Zoom's really good about keeping their software up to date. Apparently, I didn't really use it very much before this past month. So getting started, the whole premise, I think the idea behind the webinar was that a lot of people are having trouble getting into court. So we've had the webinar on parenting time orders, we've had a webinar on child support modifications, but the problem is people can't, in many places, can't get to court. That means they can't get their motions filed, and they certainly can't have they can't get an order. So what do we do with all these families who are having conflict or issues or problems that maybe they can't get taken care of by a court right now? And maybe once the courts are back in regular business, maybe they're going to be really backlogged, and it might take months to just have a regular motion heard. So I mean, the thinking behind this was that there are a lot of types of issues that maybe could be taken care of mediation that normally you wouldn't use them for. So I'm going to first invite the panelists to share a couple of comments about how they think mediation might be a valuable tool right now, just while we're in the middle of the COVID crisis. Let's go ahead and start with Kristen Robinson.
Sure, Lisa, thanks. I think, generally speaking, a lot of family law practitioners have this feeling that mediation is for your big picture case, your whole divorce case, your whole custody case, and when you schedule a mediation, you're handling multiple issues, but there's really not any reason that you can't submit smaller issues to mediation. Some judges do that regularly. Before they'll schedule something for an evidentiary hearing, they'll send smaller issues to mediation. But oftentimes family law attorneys don't do that proactively. And I think, Lisa, you're right. Now's a great time when we're having such a hard time getting in on non-emergency related issues in front of the judge. There's not any reason that we can't reach out to mediators and say, hey, we've got this issue. And especially with Zoom, you can, it could be an hour-long Zoom and you could get the issue resolved. It's certainly potentially less cost, more cost effective for the clients and get it resolved, get an order entered and be done, and not have to worry about this backlog coming that potentially could be coming down the road.
Melissa?
The thing that I wanted to mention, which I just received something on, was the fact that we all think that quadros have to be entered at the end of the judgment of divorce, but with the new CARES package, it allows withdrawal without the penalty. You still are taxed on it, but you don't have the penalty, and you can withdraw up to a certain amount if you're COVID, basically, or what do I want to say, a qualified individual for it. So if you're in the middle of the divorce, you're just starting it, and you have that ability to withdraw, what was suggested is you might want to go in and have a mediation or something. If you can't get a mutual restraining order, do a mediation to make sure that everything within retirement stays the same in place now, given the fact that people can go in and withdraw without the penalty.
Sean?
First, Lise, thanks for doing this. Pretty awesome. Secondly, just a couple of things I was thinking about is that if you can reach out to other attorneys that are on your caseload, if you're not just a mediator, or if you know other litigators, it is a great time because we know that we're backed up in the system. I think that a lot of mediators can offer facilitative or evaluative, which may help actually get more litigators to the table if they know that it's going to be something that's going to be binding, if you want to do evaluative. And the other thing is that I've been mediating consent divorces. In other words, the new filing that we can do for consent petitions. So we can pre-mediate everything, get it all together. Obviously, they still have to figure out, either the attorneys or the parties, how to do that judgment of divorce, but my mediated agreement looks pretty similar. And that's another thing that we can get teed up and have ready for them to file and for them to be through that court system a lot quicker. So I just keep pushing everybody to understand there are still a lot of things that we can do to get their cases moved through that court system a lot quicker. Just like Kristen said, even motions that we can help resolve to help them get that down and teed up when the court's open. And so I've been pushing that with every litigator that I know. Let's keep cases moving. Slow response, because it seems like a lot of attorneys are not operating. A lot of times no responses are coming from emails, so I'm not sure. But I think if we keep pushing and explaining, we can get cases moving. If you'll mediate either in facilitative or evaluative forms, we're going to make progress.
So I see a lot of trained mediators on the call, and I'm going to ask you to use the raise your hand function just so we can get a head count. If you remember, go down to the participant button and there's a raise your hand button. If you're a mediator and you're willing to take, one of the issues is this is not the whole divorce case, this is not the whole big custody, post-judgment custody litigation, but if you're willing to handle smaller issues that may only take an hour to mediate, some of these child support modifications or parenting time issues, raise your hand. I just want to kind of just get a overall sense of how many of the trained mediators that we have here are willing to work on those smaller cases, and which will help keep it. Sue actually raised her hand. Use the button, Sue. That's okay. It's okay. I got you. Let's see. Yeah. So we got a good number. I mean, we have at least 20 people who raised their hand, and I know there's probably more trained mediators on the call. So one of the things that occurred to me is the concern is that, we have, in my cases at least, because mine are the ones that go to appeal, it's super high conflict cases. And you often have one party that holds all the cards. Maybe they have the kids in their house, and even though there's a parenting time order that tells them to transfer the children to the other house, they have the children and they are the full-time, custodian. So they have the cards in their deck. So what's going to convince them to go to mediation? Probably not anything is my thinking, but I don't know if any of the panelists want to comment on the fact of, could we use the fact that the other party, the non-custodial parent, was willing to go to mediation, was trying to resolve it without involving the court. Does that help when the case eventually has to go to court once we're back in business as normal?
I don't think so. I think it's under the same kind of settlement offers kind of thing. I don't think you should be able to use that.
Okay, good point. Thank you. There's also been concerns raised about using the remote mediation where people are already I guess, at the maximum stress of their lives, you know, and are we really wanting them to settle something major, making major life decisions about custody or property division while we're in the middle of a COVID crisis? And I would like you to address that, but I think kind of the premise of, for me, of having this conversation was not for those big cases that are making the lifetime decisions, but it's just like these enforcement issues that would normally we could handle by going to court, but we can't now. But does anybody, and if you're in the audience and you want to comment on that, just let me know as well. If you have any thoughts about, you know, putting people under the stress of having to make such a major decisions, even in the context of mediation while we're in the middle of a national crisis.
I'd like to respond briefly because I just did a FIGC yesterday via Zoom, and I felt like even though and the parties are still living together, it creates less stress because, first of all, they don't want to be together. And Robin and Richard, I don't know if that's your practice, but I never get people to mediate together in one room. I'm always separating them out. To me, this would relieve a lot of stress during this time if you could do it by Zoom and get some resolution and some answers.
Yeah, I guess I would say that, I mean, I recognize that COVID can be stressful because of job loss, health conditions, isolation, all of those things, but life in general is stressful, and so are divorces in general. And to me, if we can take something off their plate that helps reduce the stress level, and I think that, I don't think that they're in any less ability to make decisions, again, unless obviously they're sick or they have a family member who's sick, than they are in any other divorce. I mean, they're always compromised to a certain degree in regards to stress levels because of the conflict in divorce, unless, you know, they're very happily divorcing. So I don't really see that as a barrier to mediating the cases or resolving them. And frankly, a lot of courts are still moving forward through Zoom hearings. And so they're not going to allow people to say, well, I'm, you know, too stressed to make that call. So I think we help to reduce it.
Monday, I just had a full de novo hearing with Judge Cunningham in Eaton County.
I think the other consideration that we have to let mediators know, as well as people who are contemplating whether or not to do a Zoom mediation, we don't know how long this is going to last. Right. I mean, we don't, you know, there's speculation that this stay-at-home order could get extended again. And even if it gets lifted, we're still going to have social distancing, and we're going to have to make, for in-person mediations, we're going to have to make some changes going forward. But this stress of this COVID-19 isn't going away anytime soon. I mean, it's not, you know, on April 30th, it's not gone. So I think, yes, the last few weeks have been hyper stressful for lots of people, but as it continues, I think people are reflecting on it, understanding it, and adapting to it. And part of that, I think, is if they're in their middle of their divorce case, they have to continue. So, and we should be there to help them resolve those issues.
Has there been any talk about having a protocol to determine whether a case is appropriate for Zoom, to mediate via Zoom? Now, we're going to talk about domestic violence protocol in just a minute, but just that there might be some cases that are not appropriate, whereas others might be more suited to having a remote mediation. Has anybody heard, I guess raise your hand if you have, and I'll call on you. Has anybody heard of a protocol being developed to help guide attorneys in figuring out whether Zoom is an appropriate tool for their particular case?
Lisa, I don't know if there's a protocol being developed, but just in my own mediation practice, some concerns that have come up are when, and I think somebody referenced that already this morning, when people are right now living in the same house. So what we have tried to do is figure out a way that if they are going to mediate over Zoom and they are living in the same house, can we do something to give them some separation? So can the attorneys talk to their respective clients, and perhaps the parties can be in separate rooms in the house? I had one particular case where one of the parties is still working as an essential worker and was able to go to her work and be in a conference room by herself. So that's the only thing that's been presented to me so far as a challenge with Zoom mediations is when people are in the same house and they don't have their attorney with them, you know.
Well, and
So-
also getting the Zoom app on your phone, they can excuse themselves into their car, they could go to any parking lot, anything like that. So there is a way to separate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but Melissa mentioned having the Zoom in your car, just like make sure, and this will come up later, I think, that your client has set it all up beforehand so that to reduce stress. The day before, you can do a trial run with them or whatever. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one big thing is that there should be a little bit of training, right? Because otherwise your Zoom doesn't work. I didn't recognize some of the features of this that we're going to be talking about later, but I've had people do some very creative things when they were there, they muted and took off video, but apparently could still hear us as they were using the bathroom, which I didn't know, which was when they came back and told me that, I thought that was awkward. But I would just say this, I think, again, you talk to people about the options. Like Kristen, you talk about usually you mediate with people in separate rooms. And for me, it's probably 50-50. It depends on what they feel comfortable with. I've had people who are mediating on Zoom together because that's what they wanted to do. And, after we conducted the domestic violence screening protocol, I've had them in separate rooms. And then when we would take a break, apparently they would go talk about stuff and then come back to their separate rooms because that's what they feel comfortable with. So mediation is always about what do people choose to do to come to an agreement. And, but I do agree, you always want to investigate that issue. Okay, are you guys going to be wanting to mediate separately? Where are you going to be and how are you going to do that?
One person just posed a question about when one party won't agree to do the mediation via Zoom. What happens? I mean, unless you've been ordered to mediate, and some courts are requiring the parties to continue to do mediation, don't you think in that case that they're going to have to do whatever type of mediation is available? But otherwise, isn't mediation voluntary? Like if one party really doesn't want to mediate via Zoom, there's not really anything that can be done about it. Do you agree with that, or am I off base?
No, I think you're right. And in the counties I'm in, it's court ordered most of the time. And I guess the things the court is going to have to do is add into their pretrial statement or their order for mediation via, whether it be in person or Zoom. That's kind of the language they're probably going to have to add to make sure that it's clear. And if they don't want to do it, you can't force them.
That's a good point, Melissa. And one of the things that maybe we can do as practitioners, we should be contacting the family court administrator or whoever is issuing those pretrial orders or judicial secretaries to see if the judges will include that in mandatory mediation, that it is to be conducted through Zoom or other, so that helps us. And for those of us that are on a court list, I think that will also help. I think if judges, attorneys, and mediators, so I think that contact that we make with our court administrators may make a big difference on that.
Yes.
I'm about to call on Lisa McNiff. Is it okay if I unmute you, Lisa?
Yep.
Okay. So Lisa just told us that a judge in Calhoun County ordered the parties to do a phone mediation, and I was just curious because
Judge didn't order it. We agreed to do it.
okay, I was just wondering why you did phone versus Zoom. Was it an internet issue or?
Well, John Brundage does a lot of our mediations in Calhoun County. He's a really, really good mediator, and he doesn't have Zoom, wasn't comfortable with it yet. He hasn't familiarized himself with it. So he asked us to do it by phone, and it worked fine. I mean, it was kind of amazing how well it went.
To me, it just seems like it's more effective, even if the two parties are never in the same room together, which is perfectly fine. When the mediator can like look at that person, and even though you're really not looking them in the eye, I feel like it's more effective than just hearing somebody talking on a phone. But I'm glad that it worked out for you guys.
Yeah, me too.
Somebody, thank you, Lisa. Somebody just asked about, what if there's kids around? And of course, I would say, just like any other type of legal situation, if you can't put yourself in a place where the kids are not going to be potentially overhearing your conversation, resolving a custody dispute or parenting dispute, you don't want to have that conversation whether you're on the phone or on Zoom or any other way. You don't want to have that when the kids are present, or able to come in and walk in on you, if you can't go to your car and have somebody watch them, then that's just not right. I mean, does anybody else have any thoughts differently than that panel?
I just had that where the parties are still residing and they agreed to take the kids to maternal grandparents' house. Mom returned to, and this was for my Fig C, which was temporary, but we did all Zoom. Mom returned to the home. Dad came to my office and we conducted there, so the kids were nowhere around.
We're getting a lot of questions, and some of them are going to be addressed, I think, when we get to the logistics part of it. So I think I wanted to move to the domestic violence screening because it's going to be so important. And I think that I'll probably be wanting to hear from Rebecca Shiemke. So if Rebecca, you could just go ahead and unmute yourself. You can be part of this conversation as well. And I don't know if you're on video or not, but if you have video capabilities, we would love to see your face. So let's talk about what needs to be done for domestic violence screening that might be different than when we have a regular mediation. Sean, do you want to address how you do it?
Sure. What I do, and this is in normal mediations also, but I independently contact each party. If they have attorneys, I send the domestic violence screening protocol to each attorney, asking them to interview their client and return the form back to me. But mine is like a 5 or 6 page. It's something that I got at my original domestic violence training a long time ago. And it also talks a lot about the communication, how they resolve conflict and what they do if somebody gets angry, that sort of thing. So I do that before I even determine if a case is going to come to me to mediate. And then once I determine that it's suitable for mediation, then I send out my checklist of things that I want done and blah, 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 the agreement to mediate, what things I think they need to consider, the documents they should have, that sort of thing. But I always send it out way in advance before I even decide if the case should be mediated. Or again, if I have parties without attorneys, I call them and I go through the domestic violence screening protocol ahead of time and talk through, which also gives them an opportunity to kind of tell their story from their side. Sometimes they feel that's important and they get that out before we get to the actual mediation.
And for me, I do everything ahead when the call comes in, especially from attorneys. Nancy automatically asks, is there any domestic violence or PPOs in this matter? If there is, we're notified right before it's even scheduled. Then we send out the form to the attorneys, and if they're improper, to the parties, ask them to fill it out, sign the form regarding domestic violence, and then set the mediation if it's appropriate.
Kristen?
I actually do the domestic violence screening at the beginning of the mediation session. And I do keep, as Sean said earlier, I do keep the parties separate in every mediation that I do at my office. And I have found that on a Zoom mediation, I can do the domestic violence screening separately. So by using the breakout room function on Zoom, I can put the parties and counsel in separate rooms, and before we start the actual mediation, I do the domestic violence screening protocol separately with each side.
Didn't somebody, when we were having our conversation the other day, didn't one of you use the waiting room function so that you're only admitting?
Yes, that was me. So once everybody's in the waiting room, you can admit one client and one attorney into the main session. Then you can click on the breakout room and you can assign each side to a breakout room. And I use 3 breakout rooms. So I have a client number 1 and attorney in breakout 1, client number 2 and attorney in breakout 3, and I have a separate breakout room for attorneys and mediator. So I admit people to the main session, put them in their breakout room, and then go back to the waiting room and put the other people in the main session. And I have to tell them they have to hit the breakout room button and it will say join breakout room number 2. And I have to give them instructions to do that. And then nobody's seen each other, even on Zoom. So that seems to work well.
So do you think it might be good because it's safe on Zoom to have everybody in main sessions? Have you considered doing that? Or are you still going to mediate with everybody in separate rooms, not seeing each other?
I still have kept everybody in separate rooms. That's just my philosophy as a mediator. I feel like it's more productive. Even on Zoom, people, I have had a couple times where I've had everybody in the main room, and some clients just can't help themselves. They have to make a snarky comment or something that's hurtful to the other side. So I've been just continuing my normal practice and treating it as if I have 2 separate conference rooms and keeping the parties separate. And it works fine in my normal practice, and I found that it works well on Zoom too. And I acknowledge that, I see some other mediators here are watching who do it differently. And Sean, I know you oftentimes keep everybody in the same room, and for valid reasons, but just my style, that's how I think it works best. And maybe it has to do with my style as a mediator as well,
Sure. Rebecca, can you share any thoughts with us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lisa. I'm happy to participate. I'm glad you're doing this. And thanks to Sean and Melissa and Kristen as well. Yeah, I think everything everyone said is great. And there are lots of different ways to do the domestic violence screening. I will say that, well, before I say that, there's lots of ways to do it. And I think the method that you use kind of depends on a lot of factors. I mean, I realize, although I represent legal aid clients, I realize there are costs involved in mediation, that the screening adds time and cost to everybody. But I do think that the best way to do a screening is to do it somehow in person, whether it's remote so that you can see the person, as opposed to sending a form for the individual to fill out. Because when you send somebody a document to complete, you have no idea if they're actually the ones who complete it. You don't know if the abusive party, if there is one, is sort of standing over their shoulder while they do it. And when you do it, in person, remotely, you get that, some of those visual cues. I know it's a little bit limited on Zoom, but it's certainly better than nothing. So I would really encourage that kind of, doing it on Zoom as opposed to sending out forms. What else? I guess, it was interesting hearing the discussion about when parties are in the same household. I guess my recommendation, as I think about this, is if there are attorneys involved, find out if the parties are still living in the same household, whether there are allegations of domestic violence. And then I think you really need to think really hard about whether Zoom mediation is going to be appropriate. Because sure, you can put people in separate waiting rooms, but again, who knows where the other party is physically located while you're having some individual conversations with one of the parties. So, so I think that's I think that's something to really think about. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, sort of thinking about this, despite all the, concerns about technology many of us have, and concerns about mediating where domestic violence is present, remote mediation could be if used appropriately and good screening is done, could be a good option for DV survivors. If you can ensure safety, if you can make sure that they're in separate waiting rooms, that they have access to an attorney or some other support person, because it doesn't require them to travel and to worry about whether their abuser is following them or what happens afterwards. So, so it could be a good option. And I guess the last thing I'll say, because I just can't help myself, is the Pullman decision that I'm sure everybody's aware of, the Court of Appeals decision that said the mediator failed to screen for domestic violence. It was harmless error. We should not take away from that the message that we don't have to screen for domestic violence. Screening is still mandated by statute and court rule. I also just want to stress to attorneys representing the parties that I think we have an obligation to make sure whatever mediator is mediating our case, that we affirmatively ensure that the screening happens. And I guess that's all I'll say. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Sure.
So unless any of the other panelists have anything more to say, or if we have questions related to DV screening, I was going to move on to the logistics portion of the program, but we don't have to rush. We've got plenty of time if anybody has any more comments or questions.
Well, I have a couple of comments. I have, hi. So nice of you to do this. So nice to see everybody. I have really grave concerns, and it may just be born out of my lack of familiarity with Zoom. Maybe in 6 months I'll feel differently. First, I think it's going to take hold in a way that we wouldn't have anticipated previously. So it'll be a part of our lives. But secondly, the idea of finalizing a document that can never be altered or without having eye-to-eye contact with my client is very troubling. I mean, the number of times I go over a final document in a mediation with my person and explain over and over how no matter what happens, you're got to live with this, basically. I find that very hard to get my arms around, that we're going to do this, just someone sitting in their car and they're going to sign their life away without being there with them. So that's, and then to the COVID period of time, I do have concerns. I mean, I've already had clients who've been reduced by 25%, whose homes, they don't know the value. I don't know how we do a lot of finalization on the bigger picture items. The smaller items, the sort of tactical things we're dealing with, I think it can be a great tool, but that's what I had to say.
Thank you, Carol. I think we're all on the same page that it would be much more difficult and proceed with a lot more caution if we're talking about actually settling the divorce case, property division and whatnot, because that is a lot more to get your hands around that is going to affect people for a lot longer. But if it's you know, an enforcement issue on parenting time or what have you, it's a lot different. Like it's not as big of a concern, I guess is just my personal perspective.
Can I say one thing? Because I saw someone say something about, remember, some people don't have internet access, which is true. But a lot of times, like I said, the Zoom is on the phone app, and you don't need internet access. You have your mobile plan with it. Granted, it might use your minutes and things like that. And my comment about doing it in the car, I'm just saying there are different options to get into a private place. Obviously, sitting in the car and doing this, you think, oh, got a car. But it's just, there are ways to go into private areas or to create a private space for you to be able to think and hear this.
You know, Carol, maybe, oh, I'm sorry, Kristen, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment that I think we need to remember too that there are some clients who are dying to get something done.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, we have concerns about, you know, as practitioners, making sure, like Carol referenced, you know, advising our clients properly and making sure that they understand, etc. But there are some people who have already been in this for a long time, you know, this divorce process, and for the thought of having this drag out for another however long it's impossible. It's you know, so if there's something that we can do to help them through that, I think that's just another perspective. You know, we have the clients, and it can also be based on the client. You know, I mean, there are clients who Zoom may not be appropriate for because of their personality and their sensitivities, but we also have clients who, you know, it might be the right thing to do. So just keep that in mind.
And Melissa Pierce made a really good point. And I'm sorry, Sean, I'll just call you in a second, Sean. Sorry about that. She has a client who's like in another state, or maybe it's the opposing party, I'm not sure, but like there already might be logistical problems that if the parties want to settle, they're already far apart. Traveling's even more difficult now. Maybe this is an opportunity to resolve something remotely that 2 months ago would have forced somebody to travel to Michigan, where the case is to get it done. So I just thought that was a really good point to consider at least. And Sean, go ahead.
Carol, I just wanted to come back to you because I think you raise a really good point. Having the opportunity to really talk it through when you're the litigator and it's your client and you're in that mediation format. And Kristen knows more about this than I do because I just literally took more training this morning off of what you told me the other day, Kristen, but these breakout rooms are private. So when you're in that room, and you may already know this, Carol, but when you're in that room, nobody's in there unless the host asks to join. So you can spend all of that time one-on-one with your client, talking to them about all the different options and all the different things. And again, it's just like any other mediation. They don't have to agree that day. You can say, we can come back for another session. So it really does give you the opportunity while you're not right next to them, and you can share documents on your screen with your client. And so we have a lot of tools available, and you can continue to email and all that other kind of stuff. So I feel like you can get a pretty informed consent. It's not perfect, I would agree. I mean, but it seems like it's a really good way of getting information to our clients and still having privacy. Again, Kristen, you know a lot more about using those breakout sessions. I haven't actually used them in a mediation yet. I've just been training on it.
So I was going to switch to logistics. Now, you've heard made mention today of the waiting room. We did not use the waiting room function today, and that was intentional, because when you have a bunch of people coming in, and sometimes people are coming early and other people are coming in as soon as they can, but it's late, the host, which today is me, would have to individually, admit people, and I didn't want to have to keep people blocked out when we were already started. So I chose not to use the waiting room function. But as you've heard mentioned, if you put the setting on to waiting room, you can, as the host, which the host would be the mediator, can see who's waiting, and you can individually pick who you let in the room. And so, for example, Kristen could see that the mother and her attorney are there, and the father and his attorney, and she can pick the two people she wants to let them in separately. That way they don't have to be in the room at the same time, especially if we have a situation where the mom and dad can't be in the same room. Another thing, we're gonna actually demonstrate the breakout room in a minute. But another thing I just learned about last night is that there's a security feature on Zoom that they apparently have made more visible. I don't know, I guess it existed before. It's called Lock the Room. So people have raised these concerns about using Zoom, having secure, people can Zoom bomb you and come into your private confidential, attorney confidential meeting and interrupt the process. Or maybe it could be a family member of one of the participants or whatever, and you don't want to let other people in the room. So once you have everybody in the Zoom that is supposed to be there, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be like a badge to the right of the video camera. There's a badge that says security underneath it.
It only shows up on, Lisa, it only shows up on
yours?
the host. It only shows up on the host.
Okay, it doesn't show up on yours because you're not the host. Okay, but there's a badge, I promise you. I found it, and I couldn't see it last night because I wasn't the host last night. It just says lock meeting, and there's also a button to enable the waiting room. So if you forget to do the waiting room and you're the mediator, you just started the session, and people are showing up, and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to do the waiting room. You can quickly enable the waiting room. You can also lock the meeting, and that prevents people from coming in that aren't supposed to be there. So I wanted to point that out. And then this is what we're going to do. And I've only done this once, so this is not going to be perfect, but I wanted to demonstrate how the waiting room works. And so because I'm the host, I'm going to be the one that's going to go into one waiting room or another. To keep things simple, I'm just going to create 2 breakout rooms. And I am going to, and I deleted the email today, but I think I sent it to the panelist, and I would like to share it. If somebody could, well, I don't have my email open right now. If one of you have my email that I sent you yesterday or the day before, and if you can copy and paste that video, it's just like, it's a link to a 3.5-minute video that tells you how the breakout rooms work. If you could post it into the chat thing, I think it would be really helpful for anybody who's about to attempt this themselves, Melissa, to watch it. And I think maybe you already watched it. So I'm gonna do the breakout room. Let me figure out, I knew how to do, oh yeah, there's a breakout room button on my screen, and it says I can manually divide the room, which means I know who needs to go where. In this case, I'm just going to do it automatically. I'm going to create 2 rooms, and I'm going to press so we're going to have about 59 people per room. I'm going to hit create room, and then I can actually also move people around. If I see somebody's in the wrong room, I'm going to move them around. So what I'm going to do, these are really big rooms. Okay. I was going to make sure we had at least 1 panelist in each room. Breakout room 1. Scrolling down, people are in alphabetical order by first name, Melissa, Sean, Kristen. Melissa, okay, Melissa's in room 1, good. Let's go to room 2. I haven't taken you out yet. You're just waiting for me to figure this out. Okay. Well, where's my second breakout room? I only see who's in room 1. Okay, well, we're just gonna rename. That's good. Open all rooms. Okay, I think if I hit the open all room button, it's gonna move you guys.
Then you have to hit the person that comes up on the screen. It will say join, and you hit that button, anyone who's in one.
Okay. Good. Good, good, good. Now, how do I get, there we go. There's breakout room 2. Good. Now, I'm by myself. Okay, so I want to join this.
I can't hear anybody.
Okay, everybody's coming back. And the panelists should unmute themselves. One of the things I keep on forgetting about is that when you come back to the main room, it for some reason automatically has everybody on mute, which is a little bit confusing if you're not expecting it.
But what we were just talking about in our room, you'll see, and someone asked, if you look down at the bottom, it says participants, where before we were at 56. Now you'll see we're all back in the main room with 114 participants. And all of you should have something pop up on your screen that says join main room. That meant Lisa, as the host, was saying, okay, everyone come on back. And the host computer has that ability. You don't, other than to leave it, storm out of the room. But she thought, okay, we got to get back all together.
Right. And if you're in a mediation session, you may not be using, this is the thing I want to make sure we had time for, you may not be having everybody in the same room ever until the very end when we're talking about the settlement agreement. Like we already have the terms decided and now we're here to document it. So we've talked, there's been a lot of messaging going on about, e-signing. And I know Randy Pittler, I think, has used a program that helps make it possible to e-sign. But one of our panelists, I apologize, I don't remember which one it was, does a recording of the settlement agreement and makes a record of it that way. And if whoever made that comment the other day could talk about that for a minute.
Kristen did.
Kristen.
Yeah, that's an option. I actually have been leaving it up to each mediation and discussing that as an option. A mediation I did this week actually we decided that I would have a written document. I would write up the settlement and send it to email it to the lawyer so they could review it with their respective clients and make any tweaks. That kind of goes to Carol Brightmeyer's concern. Is it possible that the whole deal will break down? Sure, but everybody felt more comfortable doing that. But I did offer as an option, we could bring everybody into the main room, and Zoom does have a record feature. And then that recording you can send a link to that recording to both attorneys. So then they can do, like lots of mediators use the audio recording now at mediation. It's kind of similar. This just happens to be a video, and you can have that transcribed if you wanted to, and use that video to create your order.
And I find in some of the more complicated one, and Carol, the last one we had together, what we ended up with is not a full-blown settlement, but a term sheet that embodies the intent, the theory, and there's a caveat, catch-all that there'll be any disputes would be submitted or to me for binding arbitration. And the one we just had, we were on, I think, our fourth settlement agreement. I mean, we had an agreement, but there was a lot of finessing. And then we were supposed to get together, 4 weeks ago, Carol? And then with everything going on, there were spousal support obligations, and we were just kind of frozen in time because no one could commit to it then. But I think if you have, in the perfect world, the settlement agreement signed by everyone, but if in those cases that have a lot more complex issues, that a term sheet that is as exhaustive as possible, but with some catch-all. And I think when we deal with like all the faces we're dealing with, we know that we walk away in good faith, pretty much with the understanding what the intent of the parties was.
Randy, can you unmute yourself? Can you address the process you use for the e-signing?
Yeah, so I have, and my assistant gets all the credit for this, but we use Clio for our case management. We added Clio Grow at some point, which has a feature for e-signing and creating e-signing or, electronically signed documents. So at the minimum, we've converted all of our internal documents, our retainers, intake forms, anything we might have clients or people sign kind of before they retain or immediately after. We converted all that to e-signing. So I've actually had, I probably shouldn't say this, I've actually retained a few clients during this, and we simply e-file, we email them the documents, they e-sign them and send them back. And I get the sense from watching her that we could probably convert, if we had a settlement agreement that maybe was like a fill in the blank that you could scan in, that she could easily create, turn that into a document that could be emailed and then e-signed by all the parties, immediately, kind of even before you close the mediation room. I like the record feature, but the fact that we could do that, and I know there's also, the popular program is DocuSign. I know that Adobe has an e-sign app. So, and my feeling is that these are things that we're all going to have to do in the next few months to get through this. So they don't seem very complicated. I think that would be helpful in these mediations. I know for people like, Carol, it does get tough because you can, it's hard to go through documents when you're only you're sitting next to somebody only virtually. But I can say I've had some good success and I've not had a client balk at all about e-signing a document that we've sent.
But can I ask too, because Kristen, and I know you're muted still, but can't you share your screen? Like I can switch the view of all you people here to pull up my desktop with the agreement in writing, and then the participants would view it and they could view it right there and talk about changes on it, couldn't we?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I mean, don't forget, we also have regular old email. I mean, you can, while you're in your Zoom, you can make changes to a Word document and just email it to everybody, and you can try and do that route too. That's certainly an option.
There's also an annotation function under share where people can actually sign things.
Really quickly.
And everybody watch it.
Oh, thank you.
Let me, if I can real quick, because there is like a share screen. I don't know if you talked, I got in a little bit late. And I did that with a client today where we were able to, share a spreadsheet through Google Docs and both make changes on the fly. So, that way you could do the same thing. You can go over the agreement with everybody together. But the one question I do want to back up with e-signing that I do want somebody, I mean, probably not for today's session, but whether, because now that we can e-file a lot more documents for case initiation, the question is whether we can have clients e-sign a document that gets filed with the court, because that's going to make our lives easier.
So does everybody see, Anne doesn't have a document up on the screen, but she is sharing her screen. Actually, here, I was going to share a document really quick.
I didn't think I meant to do that.
That's okay. I'm going to share the outline for today. So now everybody should see the outline I created for today, right? So, and then it's easy to stop the share. If you want to share something else, you just have to stop share and then do a new share. But that's really good. Like if we're talking about either financial information, or if we're looking at, if we want everybody to see the agreement and we're looking at the same paper at the same time, it just makes it really easy. And I also wanted to make sure you notice when we're in the breakout room, we could chat with each other in the room, and the people in the other room couldn't see our chat. And I think, Don, you mentioned that when we all came back together, the chats from the breakout room disappeared. Don, I thought you mentioned that at least. Somebody did. Okay.
They appeared. They actually are all there.
Oh, they appear for everybody to see?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe we need to disable the chat function if we're in a mediation, because, today was different because we had over 100 people, but in a mediation, you're going to have realistically, 5 people, right? Or maybe, I mean, I don't know what, like in a divorce case, there shouldn't be that many people involved in the mediation.
Lisa, so there's not really any reason, when you have the attorney and the client in one breakout room, they can talk to each other. They don't need a chat feature. I mean,
exactly.
But I will tell you, I've been chatting with Shannon Schlegel privately. There's a private function that none of you have seen.
Yeah.
Right. Is this why she's laughing?
Actually, I have to amend my statement. It looks like just the breakout chat from my room is showing on my screen, not breakout room 1.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
I was going to say the same thing. We can't see what they wrote.
Okay, so because of that, when Kristen Robinson was in breakout room 1, she posted the link to the video about how to do breakout rooms, and she did that in the breakout room. So I went ahead and copied it and put it in the chat here with all of us, so that anybody who wants to go pull that 3.5-minute video can easily go watch it. It's, you've already done it now, so you're way ahead of where we all were like a week ago. But if you are the one that's actually in charge of it, it will help you feel a little bit more comfortable. Evelyn, you said you haven't figured out if you can leave a breakout room and get back in. Yes, but I think the host is going to be contacted before you're allowed to come back into the main room. So, and when there were people that are coming, when we are already broken up, there were people that were coming in to the main room, and I was getting notifications every single time that there was somebody that was unassigned. And so I would, if I saw somebody, I would assign them to either room 1 or 2. I don't think you're going to be able to leave the breakout room without the host permission, but you'll need to double check that because
they can leave without permission. They just can't get back in.
Can't get back in.
Pardon?
They can leave though.
Let you back in then, right?
They can leave, but then the host has to get them back in.
But Melissa just said she tested it and was able to rejoin. Lisa, did you let her in?
I didn't let Melissa in because she was already assigned to that room.
Oh, gotcha. So if someone in a breakout room leaves, they can voluntarily come back in.
Yeah, but it was the people who weren't assigned, because when I did the automatic split, it was 111 people, and now by the time we broke out, there was 3 more people that came on, so I was individually assigning people, and it didn't really matter today, but I could make a much more deliberate decision based on where they're supposed to be. So,
and Lisa, I don't know if you heard when we were in our breakout room, we talked about the settings and privacy. I've already set up, since we had our get together on Tuesday, I went in, learned how to do, turn on the function that everything that comes into me, I have to admit. But for you, I understand why you didn't, because we had so many. So when you're at mediation, you just put the parties that are going to be there, you send them a check-in, they click it, and then it will say off to the side, waiting for host to admit you.
And they can't see while you're in that waiting room, you can't see anything, I don't think. I think it's just kind of like,
right,
as if there's not even a meeting happening yet. You're waiting for the host to let you know.
You can set up a note to put in that waiting room. I mean, you can even have a video running or whatever. There's some things that you can tweak on your settings so that it doesn't just say waiting for host. It'll say you are here. This is what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. So you can give instructions there. Yeah.
Great.
I was just going to say this really quick. Zoom has trainings that they offer every single day. And I assume it's probably a similar or same training, as well as recorded trainings for different things that you want to do. Really, really easy to access. And that's how, outside of what you guys have been teaching me, this is how I've been learning it. And it's extremely user-friendly. I will say the trainings go kind of fast, but once you get back on the system, you kind of understand what they're talking about. So I would just recommend that if you're considering using this for any reason, just really do some of the trainings. They don't take that long. I think the one I did today was almost an hour, but in general, you can do some that are 3 minutes, 5 minutes, like you said, Lisa.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Just to give you a heads up, next week we are doing a webinar on what is an emergency. I'm still working on assembling the panel, but I know Donna Medina is here with us today, and she's going to be with us next week. And we also have Oakland County Circuit Judge Jake Cunningham is going to be joining us next week as well. And the third person is going to be a surprise, because I have a feeler out right now that I need to make sure I don't announce anything that I'm not allowed to. So I look forward to seeing everybody next week, same time, same place. You'll get an e-blast at some point. Thank you all for coming. And now I'm going to turn off the recording. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mediators.